Good morning. I apologize for the delay. My name is Cindy. As you all know, this is our first return to the live conference. It's been a long hiatus, 4 years, 3 years. It seemed like a lifetime. So it's so good to see you all here today. We have a very special program this morning with featured speakers and then an exciting program for the remainder of the conference. We hope you can join us at all the programs, including this evening, our design awards, and our closing reception tomorrow. I'd like to open the program with some welcoming remarks from our host agencies, the San Francisco Fort Mason Center for Arts and Culture, National Park Service. We have representatives from the Native American community, and then our keynote speaker, Francesco Boundarin. It is my pleasure this morning to welcome to the stage Mike Buehler to make our welcoming remarks for the conference.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Fort Mason Center for Arts and Culture. We are so very pleased to host CPF and you for the first in-person statewide preservation conference in 4 years, which is just amazing. On a personal level, it's really been wonderful to reconnect with so many of you face to face. It really feels like a big family reunion, so that's just been fantastic. For those of you unfamiliar with Fort Mason Center for Arts and Culture, we were founded in 1977 as a nonprofit organization charged by the National Park Service with preserving the regimented architecture of the military while fostering an arts community defined by self-expression. The radical transformation of Fort Mason over the years is really a testament to the infinite adaptability of historic buildings, both physically and spiritually, as magnets for creativity and community. Our waterfront campus is emblematic of both placekeeping and placemaking. This is where historic buildings, art, culture, and natural beauty converge to create a truly unique sense of place and community. In many ways, I also see Fort Mason as a reflection of the evolution of the preservation movement more broadly. In the most basic sense, of course, we are an early and inspiring example of adaptive reuse, with this former U.S. Army port of embarkation now a thriving, if unlikely, cultural hub. Indeed, where else but in San Francisco could a site known for, quote, exporting war become home to artists known to question war's very purpose? Every day, we partner with our colleagues at the National Park Service to maintain and improve the vast complex of piers and warehouses that comprise this National Historic Landmark District. But our mission goes well beyond traditional placekeeping. Since its inception, Fort Mason Center has recognized that the mix of tenants and events on our campus, in other words, placemaking, is essential to its vitality and specialness. A core part of our mission is to curate and support the evolving mix of nonprofit arts and cultural organizations that call Fort Mason Center home, including longtime stalwarts, Green's Restaurant and Magic Theater, to more recent additions such as American Indian Cultural District and SF Camera Work. Two of our residents are listed on the San Francisco Legacy Business Registry, with nominations currently in process for Green's and Camera Work, and hopefully many more to come. We have over 10 additional organizations that are eligible for the Legacy Business Registry. We feel that it's crucial to interpret all eras of Fort Mason's history, from the original Ramaytush Ohlone presence on Black Point, to its military past, to its more recent intangible heritage as an arts and cultural hub. Art and performance have always been central to Fort Mason's identity. Through our own Fort Mason art program, we commission or partner with resident organizations to present a year-round calendar of exhibits, installations, performances, and programs. I hope you'll experience one of many installations currently on view while you're here, including the outdoor mural corridor between buildings B and C, a neon installation in the lobby of building B, or the mini photography exhibit in our guardhouse at the entry. In many ways, in all of these ways, and myriad others, Fort Mason Center is a laboratory for placemaking strategies that are inspired by and enrich our historic waterfront campus. Thank you again for being here and for all the collective work you do on behalf of the state's historic resources. Next, I'd like to introduce our close partner in this ongoing experiment, Superintendent David Smith.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see friends from other parks from around the state and folks I've not seen in a long time. And I am honored to be here and to welcome you to your national park, Golden Gate National Recreation Area. I've been a park ranger for 31 years now, worked across the United States, and I like to think that the Park Service is the keeper of America's stories, and we convey that through place. And I was thinking back to when I was working at Brown versus Board of Education National Historic Site in Topeka, Kansas. And the First Lady at the time, Mrs. Obama, came to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the site. And for those of you who have not been there before, this was the first school that was desegregated after the Brown decision. You know, it was in the black section of town, and kids from all over Topeka would have to go there to go to that school. They couldn't go to the school that was near them. And sitting there with the First Lady, she wanted to have a variety of kids there with her as well from the city of Topeka. And so you had farming kids, you had inner city kids, you had a variety there. And when she touched the walls inside that completely conserved and preserved building, and the children touched the walls inside that building, there was a spark that took these people back to a time when we told people because of the color of their skin, they could not actually go to the school that was closest to them. I saw the same spark the other day when I was at the Nike missile site up in the Marin Headlands. I would encourage you, if you do get a chance to visit that, it is an amazing site. I was born in '67, so I really, I was not here during the duck and cover drills during the 50s and 60s, but to be there inside the Nike missile site, to hear the klaxon alarm go off as the doors open, and to watch that missile rise up, knowing that during the 50s and 60s, there were young service people inside that building that thought that they were the last stand of defense that would stop the Soviet Union from invading the United States, and they were willing to send off nuclear missiles over the Pacific to do that, is a similar feeling, to be able to touch those places. So you are the professionals in this audience right now that preserve these places, and I'm so thankful for what you have done. These are challenging times, for the Park Service, and you all know that, having just gone through the pandemic. But from a budgetary standpoint right now, with the deficit where it is right now, with where our budgets are in the Park Service right now, we rely so much on our partners to do the job for us. The Fort Mason Center, unbelievable. This structure, to preserve this structure, $40 million operation, not possible without our partners and our business partners and donations to make that happen, as well as the $8 million historical tax credit that went towards it as well. But that package, we wouldn't be here today if not for that. I would invite you to go up to Caballo Point, up on the Marin Headlands side of the park, up at Fort Baker. That lodge there, all of those Army structures, they would be piles of rubble right now. The Park Service doesn't have the money to take care of that, but our business partners do. We just invited the Concrete Preservation Institute is one of our newest partners out at the Marin Headlands, doing really good work to preserve buildings here inside the park. We've got 700 structures and an annual operating budget, which sounds pretty impressive, of $23 million. But this was a $40 million structure that we're sitting in right now. We don't have the money to do it. So I am thrilled to work with our business partners. I'm thrilled to look for new solutions, and I am just thrilled to see all of you guys here inside the park doing great work. So thank you so much for your time. Have a great time here inside of your park.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Mike. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Greg Castro. Thank you, Greg.
So at least I see some people that found this place this morning. Hirsha tuhi, shamusakish, mishistu, tesep kashe, grekastro tras, totral hek, rumsen hek, ramatush hek, takakak som layam kuplambit tukutnut timitak. Ek Benjamin Castro, Trasso, Selinin, Ipach, Adeline Castro, Trasso, Aloni. Hello and good morning. My name is Greg Castro. I'm from the community of the Totral Selinin and Rumsen and Ramatush people. I am from the village of Layam, Kuplanek, Tukutnut, and Timitak, among others. And my father, Benjamin Castro, a Selinin man, and my mother, Adeline Castro, an Aloni woman, taught me to be a good person and to start off things in a good way. So I'm going to share with you a song. That's traditionally what we do. It is not a song from the Ramatush homeland here in what we, for many thousands of years, call Yalamu, and what you now call San Francisco, because our culture was not preserved. So it's interesting to be at a preservation conference, and I have to say that. And that's a very important topic. It's a sad one, but it's also a very important one that we can still do something about, all of us together. The song I'm going to sing to you is from my mother's other heritage, the Rumsen people, from a very similar landscape down in Monterey Bay. And I often sing the fog song, but it doesn't look like today we'll need it. So I am going to sing a good luck song. I want you to have a good time here in this newly reformed Yalamu. It looks a lot different than my ancestors would probably recognize it. But it is still Yalamu. The essence of this place still is maintained. And so I want to share with you this good luck song so that you will have a good time and enjoy yourselves and each other while you're here. Toa toa hiye, hiyelia ma, 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 to. Yaha. It was interesting what David just said about that spark of a place that you want to preserve. One of the struggles as Native people we have is translating our ancient concepts that can take paragraphs in English into something that people can understand. And the biggest barrier for that is English. So a word like preservation, actually there isn't really a good translation in most of the native languages that I'm familiar with. The idea of preserving something just doesn't make sense to our ancient heritage. Probably the closest to it is being a good caretaker, being a steward. That is something we've been doing for thousands and thousands of years. And it is not just a social is not just a moral, ethical point for us. It is a very deeply spiritual obligation given to us by Creator in the place that we were put. And we believe Creator put Ramaytush people here to take care of the Ramaytush homeland. And although we have struggled the last 250 years to do that, we are still here, despite being declared extinct more than once. And we are still trying to preserve our homeland. Not as it was. That's a little difficult with all the asphalt and buildings that we're sitting in right now. But the essence of it is still with us. It is still here because we believe our homeland and everything on it is alive. And so we treat it as a relative. We treat it as an elder, because most of our stories talk about us coming into the world after it was formed by the first people. And they taught us how to take care of it. That's now our job. We've done this for you. All you have to do is keep it going. And we've tried to do that for thousands of years, and we're still doing that. And working with professionals such as you is a very important part of our current work to maintain our sacred homelands. So later today, I'll be on a panel speaking on that and hopefully meet and talk with many of you and learn your role and your skills in how we might do that. Hi, it's Bonnie Khan. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you, Greg. At this point, I'd like to welcome Julianne Polanco, our State Historic Preservation Officer, to the stage. You're here to talk about what's happening at the state office.
Good morning. What a beautiful day. Thank you, Greg, for those words and for your beautiful song and for reminding us and embedding us in what we all are here to do together, which truly is to steward our collective cultural heritage. Earlier this week, I had the opportunity with some of my staff and our friends from the National Park Service to tour some of the the federal historic tax credit projects that have happened in San Francisco over the years. We toured Pier 70, a tax credit project in a former steel manufacturing plant that now is currently creating satellites for mobile phones to connect the world. It was an exciting example of keeping place and making place vibrant again. We are all partners on a global scale now more than ever. Culture allows us to celebrate what makes the places that we hold special and share with each other. Heritage shows us that we are more alike than we are different. We all have hopes and dreams. We seek health and education. We're resilient, and we're working towards thriving communities together. COVID showed us that we can stay connected and that we need these connections more than ever for our collective humanity. It's wonderful to see you all in person. Yesterday, so many smiling faces, hugging, celebrating our collective resilience. We emerged stronger in our commitment to align our desire to keep the places that anchor us and to make new places to inspire us. I was thinking about the word placekeeping and the rehabilitation of the Presidio Theater that we saw earlier this week, one of 3 remaining buildings in the military framework, and that was transformed from a single-use theater that housed and helped people go through tragedy and war and give them hope and connectivity, to now being transformed into a world-class performing arts center, infusing new life and continuing to serve its community with entertainment and the arts. The State Historical Resources Commission heard probably the largest cultural landscape nomination, Patsiata Cultural Landscape from the Eastern Sierras last year, a special place to serve those tribes and to educate and show us and remind us of the very special things that have happened on the lands that we traverse now. We have a promise of a state historic tax credit that we're standing up very shortly. We're very excited to elevate existing projects for greater economic benefit, and this one includes a homeowner project. So we're really looking forward to beginning that process. Through a very creative mitigation from FEMA, we created last year with Paige and Turnbull and some Mel Green and CPF a series of educational videos for homeowners to understand how to learn about their house, what's historic about it, how to work with contractors, so they were informed and armed with the knowledge to make intelligent decisions for themselves and for the longevities of their homes, their special places. At the Governor's Awards a couple of weeks ago, we gave an award to the University of Southern California's Historic Preservation, a group for their student podcasts. So how are we uplifting and making pathways to encourage and cajole new voices to join us, to tell us how they wish to learn and how they see their future? We continue to be involved with the Climate Heritage Network. We help shepherd a care tool, one that calculates carbon savings for rehabilitating existing buildings and helps to identify ways that buildings can become more carbon neutral. This was done with a great partnership of the American Institute of Architects, Architecture 2030, many global partners, and Larry Strain of Siegel & Strain in Oakland. And continuing with our partnerships, we are still working with the Scripps Institute of Oceanography to create a culture-inclusive climate change vulnerability assessment framework. This is now being done in conjunction with a new grant given to a Preserving Legacies project by the National Geographic. It's the only grant project that they have funded in the last 3 years to create a community-led process to derive a holistic value definition that assesses risk and creates adaptation and mitigation solutions. This project is happening in 10 World Heritage sites around the globe, including Petra and Angkor Wat. One that is in the United States is our Borderfield State Park, where we will be conducting that same type of assessment, hopefully on a cross-border project with the Kumeyaay and the people of Mexico. It's amazing the role of cultural heritage that we all play in keeping and making our environment into a just, low-carbon, resilient place to live, to work, and to thrive. Then thinking about placemaking, we have several historic context statements in our office. We're finishing the Asian Pacific Islanders in the 20th Century Part 2 multiple property document form. We have just commenced our African Americans in the 20th century. We've just funded the Getty to do a feasibility study to transform their 20th century buildings with the California specific focus into a multiple property document context statement, and a groundbreaking effort with 30 tribes throughout the state to tell their stories of the California missions, a place that we keep, a place that we know, but one that needs to be made more aware of the stories and the tragedies of peoples from their voice and their perspective. We're helping to raise the voices of communities to further tell the stories of the rich mosaic of our shared past. We seek to make new places, bring stories to light, reconcile that past, and move ahead from a history of exclusion to a future of inclusion. We are nearing signing a contract to bring our historic resources information system into a single system and advancing our digitization. This process will include a workflow system so you all can follow your projects in real time and know where we are and how we're doing and working with you in partnership. This will be a secure, accessible, and easier to access, making information more readily available to help us build a more informed future and keep what is important as we move forward. In our hybrid workforce, we will be moving, that allows us to have a staffing level that we can now move into the historic Heilbronn House, which is a 3-story building that's adjacent to the very brand new and very technologically advanced California Natural Resources Agency building in Sacramento. We are excited about the connections of the old and the new to continue our work together with our agency partners and all of you. The IRA, the Federal Infrastructure Act, will bring an increased workload to our office. We are trying to grow our staff in numbers and opportunities. We benefit from a cadre of amazing staff who are now retiring, but we are excited also for our new management team at OHP. We are keeping our brain trust, celebrating the new infusion of ideas and perspectives, and making a stronger team, your Office of Historic Preservation. I'd like to ask Janon Saunders, our Deputy SHPO and Tribal Liaison, to stand up. Janon is retiring at the end of May after a long tenure with California State Parks. I had the honor of starting this role with Janon in place, and I can't tell you what a pleasure it was to work with such a smart and thoughtful partner. She also will be given next week the State Parks Director Award for Integrity for 2022. Very well deserved. I'd also like our new Deputy SHPO and Tribal Liaison, Jody Brown, to stand up. Jody's joined us a week ago. I know that you all will welcome her, engage with her, learn from her, as we are looking forward to. Jody joins us from a long tenure at Caltrans, both in environmental and cultural resources, and we're really, really pleased to be starting this new time together. I'm so excited to be reappointed by Governor Newsom as your State Historic Preservation Officer, to have the support of our Natural Resources Agency and Parks Director, to continue to join you all in our creative and important work. We lift up voices, we listen, we create new frameworks informed by the existing, keeping and making resilient, thriving, connected partnerships. I wish you all a wonderful conference. Keep talking to each other, keep listening, keep making, inspire, listen, and imagine. We challenge ourselves to honor the past, to be thoughtful about our present, and to make the best places for our future, further, faster, together. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Julie. And thank you, Janon, and welcome, Jody. It's great to have you on the team here. It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Francesco Bondarin. Francesco Bondarin is the Assistant Director General for Culture of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, and Professor of Urban Planning and Conservation at the University of IUAV of Venice. Francesco, please come to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Cindy. But I was the Assistant Director General until 5 years ago. I'm now a happy retiree and zooming around the world and trying to transmit things that I've learned in my 20 years at UNESCO. First of all, I'd like to thank the California Preservation Foundation for inviting me. I'd like to thank Caroline, Cindy, and all those that insisted for me to come back to the Bay Area, a place where I lived for 2 years when I was a student at Berkeley many years ago. Most of you were not born at that time. and so I come back to a place that I really, really love, and I wouldn't say I know in depth, but I think I've been seeing for a long time and studying it as a planner. And I did a master on city and regional planning there. Now, what I would like to talk today to you is something not so simple, because you have given the theme integrity to this conference. And this is not an easy topic, as we will see during my presentation, perhaps also in the following discussion that will take place just later on. Why it's not so easy? That's my attempt to enter the Bay Area. And it's not so easy for many reasons. First of all, because it's a concept that has doesn't have a comprehensive universal statute. You use integrity as we in the rest of the world use the term authenticity. So we have to somehow make sense of this difference. Perhaps not the only case in which the US is different from the rest of the world, but it is a case. And also because this concept, integrity, authenticity, and significance have now become very much blurred, I would say, in the use that professionals make around the world of those. For a reason that I think you know very well, because I read the papers that was distributed, and you know very well. Integrity, authenticity, significance are born as top-down concepts, let's call it. Somebody says, it's either the Park Service or somebody, an expert says, this has integrity, this has authenticity, this has significance. And in a way, it creates a doctrine. That's a term that is used by ICOMOS, a doctrinal concept. And doctrines are rigid. And the moment in which we change the approach to heritage, and it's not just somebody that comes from the top, from an institution or from an expert, but it comes from the bottom, well, then things become complicated. We have principles. Integrity is a principle. We have, under the principles, we have a system of values, and under values, we have a system of attributes, things that detail the values. Now, normally we go this direction, top-down, integrity or authenticity, values, attributes. But now, if we want to respect diversity, we have to do the opposite. So I think we have to start from the attributes and then come up and see what the values that are represented by a certain heritage place are, and then perhaps then we can define integrity. Now, of course, this bottom-up somehow destroys the doctrinal principles that we have established. So in a way, both you in America with integrity and the rest of the world with authenticity, significance, are in trouble because these principles and concepts are now are changing as we change the role of heritage in society. And these changes, I think, in my view, are welcome because it means that heritage becomes something that is more integrated in people's life, is more representative of the diversity of communities, of societies, and so on. It's something that, in a way, creates a different role for heritage, not just something that is given to people by a state or a community or institution, but it's something that is built through a recognition of the validity and the importance of local life, local traditions, historical traditions, communities that have been living in places, just as an example, or are in any case attributing values to a place. I've been working for many years with the World Heritage Convention, which is the most important contribution of the multilateral system to heritage conservation. The World Heritage Convention is very, constructed, very built up, in its principles, in its operation, its procedures, in its liturgy, I will even call it, in a way. Sometimes we assimilate the convention to kind of a cult, because it has its Bibles, it has its liturgy, it has its priests, even popes sometimes. But so it's a very strongly institutionalized process, and it's meeting a lot of problems because all this institutionalized process and so on clashes with another principle that has been strongly affirmed in the international community by UNESCO and in general, which is the respect of diversity. So if you have these two things really collide, in ways that are interesting, I think, to explore and to look. I think you have the similar situation here. Frankly, I don't think it's different. So let's see how this concept came about. I'll give you a little bit of history, but very, very quickly. How they actually, went into a crisis along the years. I have mostly examples from around the world. I didn't put any example from America because I was very cautious not to go into your turf. But I think you can easily find similar things, because there are similar examples here, and perhaps at the end we can sort of try to understand where to go and how to use these tools. I think it's important to somehow give a relative value to the tools, but not to destroy them. They're useful because they have a history. They have sometimes a very high intensity of investment. What I think, and this is somehow anticipating my conclusion, we need to do is to avoid doing too much theory around preservation, because preservation is something that has to be has to have a high degree of empirical approach in order to allow the identification and valuing of the diversity. If you have too much theory, and I have a lot of friends who really spend their their time really, developing theory of authenticity, theory of integrity. It's okay up to a certain point, because otherwise it becomes a doctrine, and a doctrine it's normally half blind on things that are already happening or might happen in the future. Now, when we look quickly at the history, I'd like to just focus on three historical figures that are, in my view, have started this debate. First one, as you know, is John Ruskin. Ruskin was the first one that theorized heritage as a component, very important component of cultural life for society. But he had a very advanced, I would say, approach. Look at this text. It says, "The greatest glory of a building is not in its stones." This is a second half of the 19th century. It looks already at the intangible values of heritage, something that took almost a century to be recognized by the international community. And we are here in a very kind of forward-looking thing. And in his way, in a way, he was supporting his theory of the ruin. He was saying we don't have to restore buildings; we have to contemplate their ruins, their evolution in time, their way in which they degrade, because that is also part of the value that they carry. Things that, of course, were completely, against the current, the culture of the time, especially of his, arch-rival, Eugène Malouet-Viollet-le-Duc, the French guy who, on the contrary, theorized and practiced the complete reconstruction of heritage. His works in France are very, very famous, like the reconstruction of the city of Carcassonne, or even more, the complete reconstruction of the castle of Pierrefonds, which is not far from Compiègne in northern France. Why I'm saying this is a complete difference from Ruskin. Ruskin would have hated this kind of reconstruction, because these reconstructions are completely arbitrary. Pierrefonds was not like this. No, he reinvented the castle. He actually studied the medieval architecture of France, the Gothic architecture, medieval architecture, Renaissance, and he defined the principles of these architectures, and then he restored the existing ruins through his filter. So he actually built the ideal Renaissance castle. This castle never existed. Even Carcassonne never existed. Even Notre Dame, with this Cathedral of Paris, which is restored, was not like he did. So his ideal was reconstruction to an ideal form. Well, then we have a third figure, which is in the same century, which is Camillo Boito, an Italian, which, being Italian, found some kind of compromise in the two, and he said, okay, fine, we have to take an historicist approach. So, okay, with a reconstruction, but this reconstruction has to recognize the history of the building. So you see the one on the right, it's called Milano, Porta Ticinese in Milano. Is a Roman art overbuilt during the Middle Ages, so he actually restored that with keeping these two functions. I think this is more or less what we do today. We sort of respect the history of a building in order to present to the public, something that is not just a reconstruction or something idealized, but something that really carries the marks of history. So this is more or less when we say authenticity, and you say integrity, but when we say authenticity, we say something like this, something that somehow carries the history of a building. Now, authenticity is a concept that is very much used around the world, because it is in the World Heritage Convention. It has been adopted in the World Heritage Convention, and it is really practiced in in the School of Building Restoration. So it's really the principle that comes from that. But in reality, if you think about, and even integrity has the same, it's actually not a principle that comes from architecture. It's a principle that comes from moral philosophy. It was there as part of a long, even millenary history of moral philosophy before the architects and the restorers took it. So it's something that belongs to a kind of the way in which we behave in life, an authentic behavior or an integral behavior, And then at some point, it was appropriated by some of the charters that rule the profession, and in particular the Venice Charter. Had nothing to do with it. I'm from Venice, but had nothing to do with that, although I was there in 1964. But in this charter, which is the pillar of the system of principles of conservation, first time the word authenticity is mentioned, as you can see in the last line. It is our duty to hand them the heritage in the full richness of their authenticity. This was when the thing started, because at that point, authenticity became a mantra. What's interesting is that nobody defined it. It's very interesting. Nobody actually defined the word. There was no definition of authenticity. It was obvious that there was something that had to be there. So for 20 years at least, we used the word authenticity without defining it as the key principle for identifying the value of a heritage, and also to guide the restoration process. I would say that these are two functions, very different functions. Identifying the values is one thing, and guiding the restoration is another one. Perhaps the most dominant one was the second. In fact, the architects and the restorers use it a lot. There are tons of books and encyclopedias of discussions between architects on the term. But it was never officially defined. The definition came 20 years later when actually more than 20 years later, 40 years later, with this NARA Plus 20 conference. I will go back to NARA in a moment. That, in a way, as you can see, gives this definition, which in my view is very, very poor, because it's almost like a tautology. It's like the same thing, tautology, that we say when we say, the World Heritage Convention inscribes sites for their outstanding universal value. And then you ask, what is outstanding universal value? I say, well, it's a value that is really outstanding, right? So it's the definition is completely tautological. It's a similar thing. But these are very often you find these kind of things because people don't want to adventure outside. It's too dangerous. So they sort of stay inside the bubble. And these bubble definitions are not very, very, very useful. But they allow to fill a case. So there was an empty case. The World Heritage Operational Guidelines, which are the system of essentially the way in which the convention is operationalized, also talk about authenticity, and somehow they associate that to a system of values or attributes that you can see there. Form and design, material and substance, use and function, tradition, techniques, location, setting, language, spirit, feeling, and other. I think it's interesting. It's an interesting list. In fact, it comes to us from the discussion that took place in NARA in 1992, when, and I will come back to this, when of course, the convention had to face the fact that there were a number of cultures in which the material dimension of authenticity didn't work, because authenticity is really strongly linked to the conservation of materiality of a heritage, and integrity is the same thing. If you look at your definition, so it's exactly exactly this. So in NARA there was a discussion on this, and they came up with this list of things. But this list, which I think is elegantly done, it's also, as you can see, omni-comprehensive. In fact, you have everything there. So if something becomes defined by everything, then it becomes a little bit, it's not solid anymore. It becomes liquid, and maybe even at some point gaseous. So we have a concept that like this. Okay, then we have, in our world, we also have integrity. You don't think you are the only one, huh? So, but integrity is, in the World Heritage Convention, is defined, it is actually defined much better, I would say. It's a measure of the wholeness and intactness of the natural and cultural heritage. This is not the American definition, this is the World Heritage definition. So for them, or for us, let's say, it's a complementary attribute definition. You have authenticity on one side, and you have integrity. These two principles have to be respected, both, for a site to be inscribed in the World Heritage List. So you have, for every site, there is what's called the test of authenticity and the test of integrity. I really hate this thing, but because to do a test of authenticity, it's something that I have seen the most contortive discussions ever. But anyway, when you read the motivation for inscription of a site in the World Heritage List, you have a test of authenticity and a test of integrity. The integrity is well defined, but as you can see, very confined in terms of latitude. The concept is not. Whereas authenticity is everywhere, like a bit like the Holy Spirit, the integrity is actually there a little bit, maybe like the church that has to be somehow keep things on the foot on the ground. Okay, that's what we have. Now, of course, then fortunately, integrity was articulated. Also, now you have different types of integrity. Something that concerns the social function, something that concerns the structural, the physical integrity, and also the visual integrity, which is a new thing that I think came during my mandate. And we sort of pushed for that because we thought that it was important to have that kind of relationship between a site and its setting, and this makes sense. It's part of the values that need to be preserved. Okay, so as you can see, perhaps your integrity combines the two. Maybe, well, you are better judges, but for what I've read, it seems that the American integrity is a combination, like a marriage between authenticity and integrity in the World Heritage Convention. And it's okay. It's okay. It's just a matter of being agree on the term. Then, as time developed, this clash between the approach to materiality and the approach to let's say social cultural values became so strong that at some point new definition had to come out. So at the end of the 90s, we had this very interesting charter called the Burra Charter that somehow say, well, of course we have authenticity, we have integrity, but what really matters is the significance, right? And significance is defined by them, which is a combination of the soul, it means aesthetic, historic, scientific, social, spiritual value of past, present, and future generations. So it's essentially focusing on values, not on the matter, right? Like normally people that deal with authenticity do. I think it's a great charter. In a way, it was done by the Australians. Burra is an Australian location. And it was done by them because they had, of course, very strongly the feeling that they had to recognize and integrate the values of the Aboriginals and the indigenous people and so on. So, it's something that, in a way, moves away from a Eurocentric, Western-centric approach, that is the one that we use when we define authenticity and integrity, into something that somehow embraces values of other cultures. So the significance that comes out of the Burra Charter, I think, has more international value than it's not just an Australian value. Okay, so that is more or less where we stand today. And all the discussion that you hear around authenticity, integrity, significance run around this issue. Very often too theoretical to become useful. But I think I've seen a number of new approaches, especially because in the meantime other definitions of cultural heritage have come about. For instance, we have since 10 years an Intangible Heritage Convention. Now, the Intangible Heritage Convention has, of course, focused on a specific type of cultural heritage, but believe me, it has really and greatly changed the approach also of physical heritage, because people have started seeing that physical heritage is not, cannot be defined and in its values without, considering the intangible dimensions that exist inevitably in every site. But it still remains very much linked, the world of heritage is very much linked to material values. So, along the time, this became the big issue. And the question was, does it really matter? How does it matter? How matter matters? Now, the important changes happened in 1994 when this conference was organized. This is the so-called NARA conference on authenticity, actually. Which conference was promoted by the Japanese. The Japanese were not happy with the fact that, essentially all the international principles of conservation and valuation of the value of sites were based on matter, because they have a different approach. All the Asian countries, but also African countries, African regions have a different approach. Matter is just a support. It's not what matters. What matters are the values that are supported by the matter. And the case, most important, famous, was this one, famous case of the Grand Shrine of Ise in Japan, which is a temple, very simple, as you can see, it's a wooden temple, that is actually built and demolished and rebuilt every 20 years. You can see the temple has two sides. One is full, one is empty. The full one is operated for 20 years, then it's demolished, and the new one, in the meantime, is built on the side, so they alternate. Now, this is a great evidence of the fact that matter doesn't matter, because what matters are the values and the traditional skills that are also. Died 10 years ago, Herb Stovall, who was an economist actually, but also he's Canadian, great theorist of this issue, authenticity. And so they organized this with the Japanese, and ICROM and ICOMOS and all the gang organized a very interesting conference. You see in this picture Herb Stovall, Jean-Louis Luxin, who was also still around, and Christina Cameron from Canada. So they actually were able to miracle to change the convention for only time that the convention accepted something new, and they have redefined our authenticity in the convention. So we have some changes, but these changes are very slow. This is in '94, and then before we had another change, we had to wait 2018 or something like this, when, after a big wave of destruction of cultural heritage sites in Middle East and Africa and so on, the convention had to recognize that certain principles that are written in the operational guidelines, like this one, and they come from the charters and so on, cannot be applied. So we also have now integrated in the convention a new approach for reconstruction of sites when they are deliberately demolished or destroyed by conflicts or even natural disasters, and when you can prove that they have a value for the community, you can actually rebuild them, according to against the principle of conservation. Now, as I believe in empirical approach, I would like to show you a few case studies that illustrate how the principles that we have just examined came to somehow start crumbling, and we had to accept the fact that reality is more complex than the theoretical frame that we put on it. And you will see some of them, and then, I'm sure you will have some other example from this country, because this is not unique. But let's start with a few case studies, and you will see what I mean when I say that principles of authenticity crumble. This case, let's go first at urban reconstruction and conservation policies, and then we'll look at monuments. Case of Warsaw, for instance. Warsaw was a city that suffered a lot during World War II. This was Warsaw in 1945, essentially a city completely erased by the Nazi army because of the revolt of the ghetto and because of the revolt of the people of Warsaw. This was the only case of a revolt against the Nazi occupation in the history of World War II. But the revenge of the Nazi was the total demolition of the city. This is the center of Warsaw in 1945. So the people of Poland had lost what was a jewel. Warsaw was a city that had a very interesting evolution, but it was essentially marked by her Baroque history. So they took a decision, which is unique in history. They took a decision to rebuild the historic center of Warsaw as it was, something that nobody had ever tried. So we have today Warsaw as it was, because this is, you see on the left, the market square, and then rebuilt, and then you have, you see the top there is the castle of Warsaw, and then you have the castle is there. But if you go today, it's actually quite interesting. You go today, you don't realize that this is a city that was built 50 years ago. It looks like a medieval city with all its insertions of Renaissance building, Baroque buildings, and so on. The castle is intact, or looks intact. It's actually the National Museum, so all the works of art are there. It looks exactly as it was. But then you realize, by maybe studying or looking at the thing more carefully, that this is all done with modern materials. In fact, this historic center is made of reinforced concrete and then painted on, because at that time they didn't have also many resources. So most of the reconstructions are done with modern materials, and then somehow there was a camouflage, operation. It's interesting also to notice that this restoration, because it's done with modern materials, now need to be restored, because after 60 years, reinforced concrete needs to be restored. Okay, so this is a World Heritage Site. It was inscribed in the World Heritage List. How could that be inscribed in the World Heritage List? Something that had been built 50 years ago or 60 years ago, a complete reconstruction, a complete fake. It is a fake. And the convention has a very strict principle of authenticity for its sites. Well, it was an interesting discussion. I think it showed, how authenticity defined from the top doesn't work, and how also, some form of, flexibility is always needed when you look at heritage sites. It was inscribed in the World Heritage List according to recognize the exceptional value of the reconstruction. So it's not the material reconstruction was inscribed, but the exceptional value of the reconstruction. So I think it's kind of a twisting, but it's interesting that it was possible to use it. Now, we have many other cases of reconstruction. Unfortunately, I wanted to show you also Dresden and others, but let me show another one that I think is a bit different. This is not a World Heritage, but it's a different approach. It's a case of the city of Saint-Malo in northern France. As you know, northern France was completely destroyed during World War II. All the cities from Le Havre, Cherbourg, Brest, of course, and Saint-Malo. It was destroyed because they were the front. They were occupied by the Germans, and in order to attack the Germans and allow the invasion of the Allies, they had to really, really destroy all of them. It's a not so well-known history because, of course, it was done by the good guys, but in fact, most of the cities in northern France were completely destroyed. This is the situation of Saint-Malo in 1945. As you can see, completely bombed and destroyed. So they decided to rebuild it, but they didn't use the Warsaw technique. They actually said, okay, let's do the what we today in the jargon is called the triple BBB, the build back better So they actually rebuilt the city in a kind of a pseudo-medieval fashion. So the buildings look a bit late medieval, Renaissance, late medieval, so on. But they are modern, and they, in fact, people in the Middle Ages didn't know how to live, so their rooms were small, there were no bathroom, and this kind of thing. So they built something modern buildings. You can see them here, for instance. You see they're modern housing, modern buildings, and so on. But outside, they look a little bit different. So they had to change also the shape of the lots. So the city was redesigned as a kind of a modern medieval, let's call it like this. So authenticity also not very, you can see that. It's actually quite a pleasant place. I mean, when you go there, it's such a nice medieval city. It's not medieval. All right. Now we have also modern distractions. One that is really serious, and currently under work is Mosul. Mosul was in Iraq. As you remember, it was occupied by Daesh, the Islamic State, and many buildings have been destroyed. But in reality, it was completely destroyed, like France, during the successful attempt to reconquer the city in 2016, because at that time the Daesh, the terrorists, were also nested inside the city. So the allies, Iraqi and American, they decided to carpet bomb the city. That's the result of you see how it was and how it is. Now this city is so destroyed, so catastrophically, I would say, hit, that it is not possible to rebuild it, and governor has decided to, sort of wipe out, bulldoze the ruins of this city in a large part. So we will not have it anymore. I don't think they were going to go for the Saint-Malo model or the Warsaw model. And also in Iraq, you have very important mosques like this Nouri Mosque that has been also destroyed by the Daesh, the Islamic State, and now it's been rebuilt. This time with some scientific approach by UNESCO with funds from Middle Eastern countries and so on. Now let's have a look at monument reconstruction, which is, kind of, I would say, similar story. An interesting case that I think I also studied is a case of Kiev. Well, Kiev is very much at the center of the chronicle these days. This is a very famous monastery called the Lavra Monastery in Kiev. It's a World Heritage Site. By the way, incidentally, and there's nothing to do with my presentation, this is the monastery where the Russian monks are, have been accused of being Russian spies, and is now at the moment under attack by the government of Ukraine because they claim it's a nest of spies. But at that time it was just the most sacred monastery in the Orthodox Church. This monastery has a system of catacombs, like the Roman catacombs, where you find all the saints of the Russian Orthodox Church. They're all there. Over 50 of these tumuli of the saints. So it's a very important site. Now, what you see, in fact, is there was an original church, which is a medieval church, as you can see, the little dark part, and then the Baroque church, bigger, was built in the 17th century. So in a very classical, West say, Oriental style. Well, this building was dynamited by the Nazi in 1944. Actually, some people say it was dynamited by the Bolshevik, by the Soviets, but it's not clear. But essentially, when this was a city was still occupied by the Soviet army, and the Nazi arrived, many of these buildings were actually had bombs and booby traps and so on. So, but anyway, I think in this case they dynamited the building, wiped out completely. I don't have a picture now, but I'll show you others. So it was destroyed. Now, as you can see, it's still there. It was rebuilt stone by stone, even leaving this superposition of the two buildings. They actually rebuilt the rebuilding, the rebuilt structure. So this is, again, completely authentic in a way, because it reproduces the building exactly as it was. By the way, it took decades. When I saw it maybe 10 years ago, it was still under construction. But completely inauthentic. So it's difficult to understand where you stay. It's authentic or non-authentic. You see, even the current doctrine is a bit uncertain, because if you read the Venice Charter, it's a fake. If you read the Warsaw Declaration, it's authentic, because somehow gives back to the community the value that which they had, they were as a center of their culture. In Kiev, there are many examples like this. This is the St. Michael Cathedral, dynamited in 1944 also, and this is today. So again, is another complete reconstruction after a wanton destruction. It's what we say in the Warsaw Declaration. We say, wanton destruction authorizes some kind of, exceptions, in terms from the original doctrine. But how? And this is the problem, because do we have all the scientific details, scientific, technical knowledge of how the building was or the pre-existing building? Very often this is not the case. We had an interesting case, I remember one in Mali, in Timbuktu, when the Salafists took the city, they destroyed the mausoleums of the saints of Timbuktu. Well, all this has been reconstructed, but in reality, it was reconstructed without knowing what was inside these mausoleums, because nobody had been there inside. So we didn't know what was inside. So we reconstructed the shape of the mausoleums. So technically, we'll not follow the principles of the Charter of Venice or other, say, doctrinal documents. So, I'm showing this to show that okay, there is a law, there is a doctrine, but then there are a lot of interpretation and exception. I think this is a good way to show that perhaps we shouldn't make our doctrine too rigid, because otherwise, everything we do is an exception. So we better be, always on the right side rather than on the wrong side. Let me show you a case that I find also super interesting, and this is something you can actually see yourself because it's there now. This is the case of the museums of Berlin. Berlin, as you know, was completely destroyed in 1944, and then it remained with Eastern Germany for a long time until the reunification of Germany, which happened in 91, if I'm not wrong. At that point, the new state, the new Germany, had found all these ruins, all these museums were near the walls, so the Berlin Wall, so they had never been restored because they were not part of the ruins. Very important museum is a so-called Neues Museum, which went to flame, of course, was destroyed and so on. That was the situation of the museum for 50, 60 years, and nobody touched it. In fact, the museum had lost its roof, so it was like a ruin like this. So you can imagine 50, 60 years of rain, and so it was a complete wreck. They decided to restore it, and they gave the task to a very important architect called David Chipperfield. I don't know if he's done anything in here, but he just won the Pritzker Prize just a few weeks ago. He's a British guy, very, very smart and very intelligent, who decided to follow restoration by the book. So he really took the principles of restoration as they are written in the doctrine and applied it in the most rigorous and I would say even sensational way that I've ever seen in my life. This is the situation of the museum. You see the stairways bombed and destroyed, etc., and the new reconstructed. You see, he keeps the museum, he keeps the building as it was, of course, giving it just back the functionality. So you need stairs that work, but the rest is there, completely scorched, with no decoration, no painting, nothing, and so on. The entire museum is like this. It's, I think, perhaps the most extreme example of authentic reconstruction, authentic restoration that I've ever seen. This is the external exterior. He had built a kind of a gallery outside, very nice. And then this is the inside. Right? So you see the building is there, completely like if it was a industrial loft, untouched. So this is an approach where authenticity and integrity from the top generates something that is extreme, but also fascinating, because you have this building, literally the traces of the rain you can see on the painting, everywhere. It just gives back the functionality of the building. The building has to have a roof, of course, otherwise, and some electricity or things like that. Okay, so pure authentic. Then about maybe half a mile from that, there is another museum, which is now called the Humboldt Forum. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's been recently finished. The Humboldt Forum was built on the place where the Palace of the Kaiser was placed. This is the Palace of the Kaiser. The Palace of the Kaiser, the city palace, of course he had many palaces, but this was a city palace. The Kaiser Palace was destroyed, but not completely. In fact, it was hit during World War II. Some people wanted to rebuild. It was fixable. In fact, the American Army had its temporary headquarters there, in some parts of the building. But this fell, as you remember, in the east. So the new government of the communist Germany said, no, Kaiser out. No, this is socialism. And they demolished completely the building, and they built this palace, which is called the Palace of the Republic. It's actually an interesting modernist building, very, something that you would do in the 50s or something like this, but not bad. I mean, I don't think it's particularly bad. I mean, except that it really was the symbol of replacement, the new government, the new people of Germany, the communist ideal, and so on. So this is East Berlin from 1960, and then it remained there for even after the reunification. But of course, it was the symbol of communism. So the new Germany said, no, this cannot stay. So there was a big discussion between right and left, and people at East felt that this was the symbol of their history. It was a big discussion: should we keep the history? Should we not keep it? At the end, demolished. And they decided to, guess what? Rebuild the Kaiser Palace. But, of course, there's no Kaiser anymore. So this Kaiser Palace, first of all, is made of concrete, as you can see. The Kaiser Palace is a museum called the Humboldt Forum, which is a museum of culture and anthropology. Very powerful. It's one of the biggest museums in Europe. It's enormous. You can see that. That has, as you can see, two faces. On this, half of it is the Kaiser Palace, rebuilt. And half of it is a modern building. So you don't make a mistake that this is actually the old one. Now, I always wonder, you have these two examples, two museums, same government, same administration, same people, and two completely different approaches. One totally according by the book, and one totally pastiche. Okay, so that's how it works. So far for respect of the sacred principles. In a way, they are adapted always to new ideas and new function. And especially when there is some uncertainty, then pastiche comes out, because pastiche is the representation of uncertainty. Okay. We had other cases. Just go fast because it's late. Okay, the construction of the Mostar Bridge. You remember the Mostar Bridge was very important. This is a 17th century bridge of the Ottoman Empire. It was very much damaged during the war, and then finally destroyed in 92, I think, destroyed by the war during the war in the Balkans. A situation was left like this with no bridge. So the international community went there and said, okay, no, we rebuild the bridge. So there was a temporary construction, and then the building is rebuilt. But again, this bridge is not done with the it's not done with the techniques and the material of the old bridge, because they all fell in the river, so it cannot, and were destroyed. So it is a new bridge that replicates the old one. So in fact, it doesn't, and it is a World Heritage, and it doesn't follow the principles that are, so strictly, fixed in the charters. It's an approximation, and perhaps is the best possible approximation to what we want to do, but certainly responds to the idea of giving back to the community something that is valuable for them, because the bridge, by the way, connects two communities of different religions and so on, so it was also a symbol of their relationship. Then we have the very important case of the Bamiyan Buddhas, still ongoing, so you can follow it. The Buddhas were destroyed, remember, in 2001, and left like this. It's great Buddhas from 1,500 years, dynamited by the Taliban. Of course, the place was not just the Buddha, so it was inscribed in the World Heritage List because of its other values. These are 1,500 monk cells that exist there. And some people are trying to sort of reenact the Buddhas through projections. This is a projection, which is a way to sort of say that the Buddhas were there, but we don't rebuild them. But there is a big discussion, because for 10 years we said no rebuilding because it's a fake. But then the Warsaw Declaration came, and the Warsaw Declaration actually spots exactly situations where there is a wanton destruction of something that is valuable for the community and in general the international community. So I'm not sure now that the Buddhas will not be rebuilt. This is something that might happen. And I want to finish with the last example, which is this one. You certainly remember. I finished with this because there was a big debate on authenticity and integrity around this reconstruction. As you know, this is the fire that totally destroyed the roof of Notre Dame, leaving it, unfortunately, still standing, but in a very bad shape. The reconstruction, cleaning took place. This is still ongoing, so it's not finished. Reinforcement of the different parts to avoid collapses and so on, and removal of this enormous scaffolding that was there because the fire happened during the beginning of a very important restoration. But the big discussion on the authenticity and integrity was on the flesh, on the spire of the church, which had been built by Viollet-le-Duc, the guy that you saw earlier, in a kind of a reinvention of the medieval spires. This spire never existed. There was a spire, which was removed at the end of the 18th century because it was crumbling. It was I think it had been built 3 centuries earlier. They removed it. So, in fact, Notre Dame did not have a spire until the 19th century. And when Viollet-le-Duc started restoring and rebuilding, I would say, Notre Dame, because it's all some part of it's largely rebuilt, he designed this spire, which in his view was the ideal spire that had to be there. So it's very tall. It's like, I think it's a 96 meters, huge construction, very, very beautiful, by the way. And of course, it collapsed, hours after the fire. At that point, a big discussion came about because President Macron said something. Sometimes he says something, and he said, well, maybe we could do an architectural gesture. Architectural gesture in Notre Dame. And the architect said, architectural gesture, it's me. So a lot of architects proposed architectural gesture. This is the one by Foster, by the way, not the best, a glass spire. And they said, okay, but there were many, I spare you because it was a delirious thing. But, it was a big discussion that lasted almost 2 years. I thought it was a very interesting discussion. I actually wrote a few articles on this because it was interesting to see how it was going to be addressed. The spire actually was very well known. There is even a existing model of the spire as it was. It was completely known. So no problem in rebuilding the spire as it was. The problem was the architectural gestures. So there was a big debate, and that lasted for 2 years. But it was really, impossible to go out. In this case, out of the, classical response. So at the end, even Macron said, okay, we'll do it as it was. And so they're actually rebuilding it as it was. Now, just to conclude, so in this case, there is a victory of the classical and official authenticity approach. So we have these different languages and vocabularies and so on. But I think what's important, perhaps to go beyond this, I know that there is a discussion also in this country, because your integrity carries the same problem of the international authenticity. All the problems that I listed, or more, not all of them, but are beyond that, because this is a top-down concept. And the moment you want to focus on values rather than on material, on matter, then you have a problem. So there is a big discussion, but because it's embodied in the law, like authenticity is embodied in the convention, it's very difficult to change, because you have to find another way of describing this system that has legal implications without destroying it, because otherwise everything goes berserk. So I think that perhaps solutions have to be found not on the doctrine, but on the flexibility of an approach. The fact that conservation and preservation is something that is done for the people. It's not done for the respect of a law. It's done for the people. So we have to look at what kind of values people attribute to heritage. What is the place of heritage in their value system? And this, in a way, is the lesson that comes to us from the intangible world. You put people up front. This has happened sometimes. For instance, give you a couple of examples. This is the famous Tongariro mountain in the volcano in New Zealand, which is the most sacred place for the Maori. Now, you go to this mountain, it's actually at three volcanoes. So it was first inscribed in the World Heritage List as natural heritage. Of course, 3 volcanoes, very interesting, natural heritage. But then people say, excuse me, our system of values is over there. And believe me, there is nothing built. It's not a place where you, even the shrine, there's nothing. It's just the values are attributed to the natural feature because they are part of the value system and the spiritual system of the Maori. So at that point, even the convention adopted this approach and renominated the site as cultural landscape, and it was inscribed for this kind of attributes, intangible attributes. So there are ways of dealing with these issues. Case of Varanasi, this is not a World Heritage yet, but as you know, is a place that Modi likes a lot, so it might be at some point. This is a city that was one of the oldest in the world. Varanasi is 3,000 years old, and that in these 3,000 years, everything has happened there because the Ganga River is the most sacred place for the Hindu. So the material form of the city has changed completely, and it's changing all the time, by the way. So there's no way you can be, consider an authentic place from the point of view of its material existence. But it remains, since 3,000 years, the center of the spirituality of the Hindu people, almost 1 billion people, and this is where they go prayer, they go for being cremated, for burial, and this and that. So it is the focal point of the spiritual life of 1 billion people. So how can you not say that it is an authentic place? This is a very important case that shows some of the contradictions that we are encountering today. So just to close, my table. Authenticity, integrity, I don't know if the table is good. I think I did it when I was jet lagged, so maybe forgive me. But for authenticity, okay, for cultural heritage, but that natural heritage, people refuse the word authenticity, even in the World Heritage Convention. The natural heritage are never inscribed or considered for authenticity, because the natural heritage, people say, authenticity what for natural heritage? It doesn't work. So it only applies to culture. Or intangible heritage. Also, intangible heritage refused, when they did the convention 10 years ago, they refused the term authenticity. So it remains an attribute or a characteristic of cultural heritage. Integrity, on the contrary, is admitted both for cultural and natural heritage, but is nowhere to be found in the intangible. And significance, the one of the Burra, which is not, say, in the convention, so it doesn't have that kind of international sacrality, but it works for cultural heritage, doesn't work for natural heritage, and yes or no, depending on the time of the day, it's for intangible heritage. Well, thank you very much for your attention. I hope it was an interesting exchange, and I look forward for the next discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesco. We're going to take a 10-minute break and then return. We're going to have our close it with our panel discussion on integrity at the crossroads. So if you will be back here in 10 minutes. Thank you.